Great Tartary covered nearly a third of Asia on the maps printed in London in 1771, where the first edition of the Encyclopædia Britannica gave it a long and sober entry. Within 3 generations, the name was simply gone from the atlases: no surrender, no treaty, no recorded war. I want to be precise about what I mean by gone. The territory remained, of course. The mountains stayed where they were. The rivers kept their courses. The people went on living. But the word that had named all of it for 2 centuries thinned, faded, and dropped off the page. The accepted explanation is clean, and I think it deserves to be stated properly before anyone starts pulling at it. Tartary was never a country. It was a European word, Tartaria, Grand Tartary, draped over an enormous stretch of Asia that mapmakers in Paris and Amsterdam simply did not know well. To a cartographer in 1700, everything east of Muscovy and north of Persia and India was half rumour. They had traders' notes, a few embassies, the accounts of wandering monks, so they wrote a single grand name across the blank and moved on, the way older maps wrote, "Here be lions." And when the blank filled in, when Russian surveyors mapped Siberia, when the Qing pushed west, when borders hardened into the empires we recognize, the catch-all word had nothing left to cover. It dissolved into specifics: Kazakh, Mongol, Manchu, Uzbek. The vague name simply retired. That is reasonable. I have read that explanation many times, and most of it holds. Exonyms do die this way. Abyssinia became Ethiopia. Cathay folded quietly into China. Names are placeholders for ignorance, and ignorance eventually gets corrected. If that were the whole of it, I would have nothing to say to you tonight. But here is the first detail the tidy version does not quite absorb. That 1771 entry does not read like a label slapped over a blank. It describes Tartary with structure, a great, a lesser, an independent Tartary, each with its own bounds, as though someone were dividing up an administration. A vague placeholder does not usually come pre-sorted into provinces. You do not subdivide a thing you admit you cannot see, and yet the 18th century references treat these divisions as settled, repeating them from atlas to atlas, nation to nation, with a consistency that simple ignorance does not normally produce. Maybe that consistency is just copying. Cartographers borrowed shamelessly from one another. One authoritative error could propagate for 100 years. I have made that argument to myself, out loud, more than once. It is the sober answer, and I keep it close, because I do not want to be foolish here. But copying explains why the divisions are identical. It does not explain why they are so administrative, why a region supposedly unknown was nonetheless drawn with the grammar of a governed place, a clear hierarchy, as though the mapmakers were not guessing at geography, but transcribing a structure that already existed somewhere. Let me step away from the maps, because the maps alone would not have held me here. The thing that turned a curiosity into a question is what stands on the ground inside that vanished name, and across half the rest of the world too, the architecture that nobody quite remembers building. Consider the Star Fort. From Eastern Europe to South America to the far edge of Asia, there are fortifications built as perfect geometric stars, bastions angled outward in mathematically precise points, the same form repeated across thousands of miles and dozens of unrelated cultures. The uniformity is genuinely strange to stand inside. Now, the official answer here is strong, and I will not pretend otherwise. Star forts share a shape because they share a problem: the cannonball. angled bastions eliminate blind spots and deflect artillery fire. The geometry is physics, not conspiracy. Engineers across the world solved the same equation and arrived at the same star. I accept most of that. It is the most reasonable thing anyone has said about the star forts, and it would close the matter, except that the same uniformity keeps appearing in places where there was no shared equation to solve, in ornament and proportion that no canon ever required of anyone. Which brings me to the buildings that were raised only to be destroyed. In 1893, Chicago built the World's Columbian Exposition, the White City, hundreds of acres of vast neoclassical palaces, domes and colonnades on a scale that rivaled Rome. Then, within 2 years, almost all of it was gone. The official account is straightforward and well documented. The buildings were never meant to be permanent. They were staff, plaster and jute fibre over wooden frames, built fast and cheap for a temporary fare, then demolished or lost to fire because maintaining them was never the plan. A spectacle designed to vanish. I have stood with that explanation a long time, and most of it is simply true. We have the contracts, the construction photographs, the material records. These were temporary structures, and still a small question will not leave me alone, and I want to hand it to you exactly as it sits with me. Why does the temporary architecture of the late 19th century, the expos in Chicago, in Paris, in San Francisco, in Buffalo, so consistently look like the recovered ruins of something older and grander than the era that supposedly invented all of it on a deadline? Why does the disposable version look like a memory? There are people who study those same photographs and draw a different line through them. They see not a fair built to be torn down, but an older world being photographed shortly before its removal, the demolition recorded, then recaptioned as construction. I do not tell you they are right. I tell you their question is not stupid, and the difference matters enormously. A stupid question can be answered and then dismissed. This one survives its answers. Every time the official record closes one door, temporary plaster, shared geometry, a faded exonym, the same shape of anomaly reappears one room over, wearing a fresh costume. Take the buried floors. Across old European and American cities there are buildings whose ground-level windows now sit half below the pavement, whose original front doors open onto packed earth. The basements were once the parlours. Something raised the ground around them by a full story, and we rarely stop to ask what. The explanation is real and almost boring. Cities accumulate, streets are regraded, sewers are laid, debris and fill and centuries of rebuilding lift the grade slowly upward. Pompeii was buried, London's Roman layer lies 20 feet down, ground rises. This is ordinary urban geology, and it is mostly sufficient. Mostly. But ordinary accumulation is slow and uneven, and some of these buildings were swallowed to the same depth in the same handful of decades, in cities that share no river, no soil, no single flood. The thing that buried them, if it was ordinary, was also oddly punctual and oddly level. Do you feel the pattern doing its quiet work yet? No single one of these is impossible. The exonym fades. The geometry is physics. The plaster was always temporary. The ground always rises. Each anomaly, alone, has a key that fits it. It is the whole bunch of keys, all cut in the same year, that unsettles me. There is a man named Anatoly Fomenko, a serious mathematician, who built an entire alternative chronology, arguing that great stretches of recorded history were duplicated, invented or misdated, that the timeline itself was edited. almost every historian considers his new chronology to be thoroughly, comprehensively wrong. I am inclined to agree with them. I bring him up not as an authority, but as a symptom. Flamenco is what happens when a careful mind stares too long at the seams of the record and decides the seams are the whole story. He went much too far. But you do not build a discipline of doubt around a record that has no seams in it, and the record of Tartary's disappearance has seams. Here is the one I cannot file away. The name did not fade gradually from one source while persisting in arrivals, the way a contested exonym should. It receded across hostile, competing powers at roughly the same time, as though by an agreement none of them ever signed. Think about who controlled those maps. The Russian Empire, expanding east, the British, mapping their routes to India, the Qing, pushing into Central Asia, the Ottomans on the southern flank. These were rivals, spies, wars, mutual contempt. They agreed on almost nothing at all. Yet on this, the quiet retirement of a single name, they moved as one. That is the part one wants you to hold, because it sits at the heart of the whole problem. To erase a thing from history, you do not need a single villain in a single room. You need only every institution with an interest in the new order to find it more convenient to look away at the same moment. And convenience is a kind of coordination that needs no meeting. The Russians had no reason to insist on a grand pre-existing power in lands they were claiming as virgin frontier. Neither did the Qing. Neither did the mapmakers selling the new, modern, rationalized world. The silence served everyone, so everyone kept it. I keep testing that idea against its own weakness, because it is seductive, and seductive ideas are dangerous. The obvious objection: shared convenience is not the same as erasure. Empires let inconvenient names die all the time without any of it meaning a buried civilization. The absence of a word is not the evidence of a hidden war. That objection is correct, and I hold onto it firmly. If the vanished name were the only thread, I would let it go tonight and sleep. But the name vanishes, and the architecture appears without clear builders, and the ground rises on schedule, and the grandest buildings are filmed in the very act of coming down. One thread is a coincidence. Two is a pattern you can argue with at a dinner table, but when every independent anomaly points, by its own internal logic, toward the same missing decade and the same missing power, when the gaps line up across maps and stone and chronology, the emptiness slowly starts to have a shape. A shape is not a proof. I need to be honest with you, and with myself, about that distinction repeatedly, or this whole thing becomes the very disorder I distrust. I cannot show you the Tartarian Empire. I cannot show you the war that ended it. I can only show you the precise size of its absence, and the absence is the strangest artifact of all, because absences are not supposed to be this consistent. Random loss is ragged. Some records survive, some don't, in no particular order. What I keep finding instead is a clean edge, as if the loss were not loss at all but removal, performed once, thoroughly, and then tidied. Consider how much would have to be true for the ordinary story to fully hold. A name precise enough to be subdivided into provinces had to be meaningless. Builders skilled enough to raise star cities had to leave no boastful record. An entire architectural memory had to arrive already nostalgic. All at once, everywhere. Any one of those I can swallow without much trouble. The whole set, swallowed together, asks me to believe in a 19th century more forgetful, more uniform, and more strangely synchronized than any other century before or since. a century that built like it was remembering and demolished like it was hiding the evidence of remembering. Maybe it was. Maybe the Victorians really did invent a global neoclassical fever, build it in disposable plaster, tear it down for ordinary reasons, and the resemblance to ruins is only my pattern-hungry eye finding faces in the passing clouds. I genuinely cannot rule that out, and I will not pretend to you that I can. But notice what that explanation quietly requires of you. It asks you to trust that the most documented, most photographed, most self-congratulating century in human history happened to lose, specifically, the answer to one question: who exactly built the world it claimed to have inherited, and where the name of that world went? I have gone looking for the architect of the silence, the way you are supposed to in a story shaped like this one. A ministry, a society, a single suppressing hand. I have not found one, and I have slowly come to think that looking for one is the mistake, the very habit that keeps the answer hidden, because a named conspiracy would be fragile. Conspiracies leak, men confess on their deathbeds, documents survive in the wrong drawer. What I am describing is far more durable than any plot, because nobody had to run it. It is what happens when a new order finds an old one inconvenient, and the whole world, independently, agrees to call the ruins a fairground. That kind of forgetting does not need a war room. It needs only that remembering be unprofitable to everyone at the same moment. And if that is what happened, then there was a war. Not of armies necessarily, but of records against records, of the new map against the old one, fought and quietly won before any of us were born. I told you near the start that I would not rush you toward revelation, and I mean to keep that promise now, at the end, when rushing would be easiest of all. I do not have a revelation for you. I have a measurement, the exact dimensions of a hole in the record, that everything around it is shaped to fit. So let me leave you where I actually live with this, which is not at an answer but at a doorway. Pull out an atlas printed before 1800 and find that enormous word stretched across the whole of Asia. Then find the atlas, 50 years later, where it is simply gone. Hold the two of them side by side. Notice that nothing in either book explains the distance between them. No battle named, no empire's fall recorded, no obituary written for the largest country that ever appeared on a European map. Just a name, present and then absent, with all the quiet of a room that someone has very carefully finished cleaning. I am not asking you to believe in a lost empire. I am asking you to account for the cleanliness. Loss is messy. This is tidy. And tidiness in history is almost always the fingerprint of intention, of someone deciding what the next generation would be permitted to find when they finally went looking. Whoever decided, if anyone decided at all, decided well. The evidence for the old world and the evidence for its ordinary absence are made of the same stones, the same photographs, the same fading ink, and you can read them either way depending on which century you have already chosen to trust. I have not chosen. That is the part one cannot get past, and the part one I'm handing over to you. The official story and the buried one are not arguing over different facts. They are the same facts, lit from opposite sides, and the light you happen to pick decides what you see. The record does not protect us from this choice. It cannot. A record can tell you what was written down. It cannot tell you what was left unwritten, or by whom, or why the unwriting was so smooth and so total. Somewhere between the 1771 atlas and the next one, a door closed on something, and the latch was oiled so well that we still cannot hear it. I have found the door. I have run my hands along its edges in the dark more times than I would like to admit to you, and I have not opened it. I am not certain I want to, but I wanted you to know that it is there, and that the wall built around it is newer than the door.